so far? Okay. First, I want to say good afternoon or good evening, and thank you for joining us for part 2 of our conversations on race, on and about race, presented by the Human Relations Commission, or your Windsor Human Relations Commission. I'd like to recognize one of the commissioners that's on board with us, and she also serves as our secretary, and this is Commissioner Desiree Primus. I'd like to thank Sandra Brown and our liaison, Mr. Jim Burke. Also, special thanks to our IT department, Frank and Jose. We really appreciate this. We do this in coordination with our other partners, which are First Church of Windsor, Archer Memorial, and also Grace Church. And any of you all that are members of the church, we really appreciate you being here, because I consider you in the family of presenting this very important topic, or these multiple topics. So thank you for taking a little time out of your Sunday evening to watch or be a part. Our next presentation will be in January, and it will be, I'm putting together a youth panel. So it's gonna be adults just sit back and watch and let the youth discuss. So hopefully we'll get participation from Windsor schools, also from the Windsor schools, Loomis Chafee, as well as Medina Academy. And we'll have participation from all those students, hopefully. And any university people are also welcome to attend. They're young people too. So I look forward to getting the perspective from them as youth as to what's going on in our state, in our country, and just listening as an adult and just sitting back and letting them have the discussion. And at the end, I will be giving you contact information on, anything that you want to talk about, any special comments that you want to make, that kind of thing. So without further ado, I'll get right into the reason that we're doing this second part. The first part was attended, or well attended, and we discussed the movie, The Hate You Give. The conversations and the discussion by the panelists, our distinguished panelists this afternoon, were the same panelists that were on the first part. And the discussion was so engaging that we decided to do a part 2 and to allow you to have and talk about what's going on as well. The movie, as you may want to keep in mind, that this movie was produced in 2018, way before a pandemic, way before the thought of Black Lives Matter, which was still in progress then, but it wasn't as fervent as it is now. And it stars a young lady by the name of Amanda Schoenberg, who stars as Star. Sean Smith as Khalil. And the film received an NAACP award for its presentation. So just keep in mind when you're watching this, that the year was 2018 and now it's 2020. And just remember the salient points of this film and how important it was. Without further ado, I'd also like to introduce our panelists. I'll start with our facilitator, who will each tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll watch a little snippet from and about the film. First is Castella Copeland. She is our facilitator. And I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself, Cassie. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So my name is Castella Copeland. Most people call me Cassie here in Windsor, and I will be your facilitator for tonight, kind of guiding us through this experience. A little bit of background on myself is I am a 2nd grade distance learning teacher at the International Magnet School for Global Citizenship in South Windsor, and I'm also a doctoral student, so I'm just grateful to be here with you all.
Thank you, Cassie, and thank you for agreeing to facilitate this for me. I appreciate your efforts. Our next panelist is Genevieve Condon. She's from Bay Path University, and hi Genevieve, I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Hi everyone, nice to see some familiar faces again. I am Genevieve Condon. I am senior lead faculty in the psychology program at the American Women's College at Bay Path University. My trade before getting into teaching, I was a forensic psychologist, and I've been teaching for about 6 years full-time now. I'm very thankful to be here, and hopefully we can get some great discussion going in the second part.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Genevieve, for being a part of the panel as well. I'll move on to Kamala Avant, also from Bay Path University. And how you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right. Bear with me, I have to go through it. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Again, nice to see some familiar faces from our first discussion. Again, Camilla Avant, I'm an adjunct professor with the WELL program at Bay Path University. And also I wear a number of hats. In my full-time job, I lead a diversity inclusion online publication, Color Magazine, which is based out of Boston, and we do diversity and inclusion events, thought leadership, and programming. And I'm also the chapter president of New England for the National Association of Multi-Ethnicity and Communications, and that organization is founded to empower, promote, and advocate for diversity and inclusion in the media, entertainment, and communication space. So happy to be here again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a special panelist on board is Ms. Maria Furlow. She is also a bridge builder, but she's a special part of this programming as she helped to organize Ms. Genevieve and Ms. Kamala. So thank you so much. And I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself as well, Ms. Maria.
Why, thank you, Judge.
Besides, she makes the best coquito ever. Okay, now you can go.
Hi, everyone. Not only do I see some familiar faces from the last time we were in Zoom, but I see some familiar faces from just in town. So hello, Desiree, Joe, how are you guys? My daytime job, I'm an adjunct faculty hiring manager for the American Women's College at Bay Path University, so a lot in common with the other panelists. You know, on the side, very grassroots still. I am the executive director and host for the Girlson's Talk Show, which I launched back in 2017 now. I serve as the vice president of the Windsor Junior Women's Club in town. I also serve as the vice president of NAMIC, another thing in common with Camilla, which again is the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity in Communications for the New England chapter. So I just always love to say that I am a Windsor baby, class of '89, here to stay.
All right, thank you so much, Maria. I do want to do recognize two other commissioners that have joined us, and that's Mr. Leonard Swade. If you wave, Leonard, and also Ms. Joyce Armstrong, and a former commissioner of the Town of Windsor Human Relations Commission is Dick Armstrong. If he'll wave. Thank you all for joining, and I also like to recognize Town Councilor Joe McAuliffe, if he'll wave. Thank you, Joe, for being a part. And also a special friend from Texas that used to sing with me. I see John Connell, if you'll wink. Good to see you, sir. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Cassie to start the snippet, and then after that, she'll give you her instructions. She's in charge now. Enjoy.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. So some of you may have already been familiar either with reading the book or watching the film called The Hate You Give. I'm also going to put the link that we are going to watch here in the chat in case you need it as well. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch a little snippet from the movie to give some context here. If you can just give me a thumbs up so I know that you can see it, then I will press play. You can see it, so that way I know. Awesome. All right, great. Here we go.
With me, you best bet we don't get pulled over. I don't mean I did something wrong. Maybe I made a mistake driving. Maybe I didn't do nothing at all. Now when it happens, don't act mad.
All the things they said to hold her back, they never seemed to leave her head and tend to keep her mind at war. All the things they said to hold her back, they keep her locked inside of all the times when she's been hurt before. Her eyes are swollen as she tries to hold her tears back. Her hands are shaking and her palms are sweating when she says, I don't wanna listen to a word you say. Telling me what I can be.
You sure? And I miss you.
And I've been looking forward to this day. The day I prove you Time is passing slash, she saw the ones who left her sore. Smiling at them now, she's walking up to thank them for all the times they tried to push her cause they wanted her to fall, but now she's standing taller than before. And all the times they tried to hit her cause they wanted her to bleed, but now her wounds they don't burn anymore.
What do you need me to do? I want to help. I see people for who they are the exact same way I see you.
If you don't see my blackness, you don't see you.
And I've been looking forward to this day. The day I brought you around. The day I brought you around. The day I brought
I'm going to take you home. And I'm going to meet your father.
All right, so that is the end of our clip. So it's kind of, again, just kind of highlighting a couple of things here from the film. I'm going to move over here to some of our slides. So as you can see, there's going to be a lot of different kinds of topics that we're going to talk about here around racial identity and also a bit with gender here. So we have some conversation guidelines as a way to ensure that we hold one another accountable with our words and actions. So just going to run through these real quick. We're going to speak from the I. So speaking from your own experiences, not that he said, she said, they said kind of thing. You want to speak from your own experiences and knowledge. You're going to listen to understand one another. So instead of trying to see, oh, well, is this the way I want to respond to someone? Will they like me more if I say it this way? Or is this what I'm supposed to say? Try to listen and understand, well, what is this person trying to tell me? It might be something different than what I'm used to experiencing. So I want to try to listen to understand them. We're going to lean into some discomfort today. So again, everyone's coming from beautifully different places here. So we're going to lean into our discomforts with one another and our feelings. Confidentiality, this means it's kind of like the Vegas rule. What happens here stays here, but the lessons leave. Meaning that we're going to share some stories with one another during our breakout room time together. And as we get to know each other, a lot of things will be said, but you can take the lessons with you as we go here. And then finally, we want to be respectful. Now, in the online environment here, being respectful looks a bit different. That means we're going to stay muted here while either a presenter or panelist is talking. Same thing in the breakout rooms. We want to be respectful by giving each person a turn to talk. So if you find that you're talking a lot, maybe kind of flow in the space and then flow out so that way more people in the space can talk as well. So if this looks great, just give me a thumbs up and then we will be on our merry way. This looks good, so I see that consent is key. Excellent. All right. All right, so here's our brief agenda. Don't worry, I won't be talking for too much. It's going to be our panelists soon. So here's our brief agenda. We're gonna do a brief summary of Thug, and meaning the hate you give, and the what we went over at the previous event. Then our panelists are going to kind of continue to share their thoughts and feelings based off of ideas that we've had from our last event. We're going to do some breakout discussions because I know last time a lot of people had a lot of things that they wanted to share. So I think some breakouts will be a great opportunity for you all to share and connect with one another over our experiences and thoughts. And then we're going to come back as a group. You're going to have one person share out what'd you talk about, how did it make you feel? And then we're going to close out with our lovely Honorable Judge Kevin Washington. And then I'm going to give you some optional homework if you'd like to continue to learn and explore this topic on your own time. So that's our brief agenda here. So again, this is a recap. Many of you are already familiar with The Hate U Give, whether you read the book or watched the movie. It is about a 16-year-old Star Carter who attends a party, and her friend, who is also Black, brings her home and winds up getting shot by the police because he is carrying a hairbrush, which they mistaken and profile him for having a gun. This causes a lot of internal and external conflict for our main character, Star, because she goes to a private school, which is a predominantly white space, and she's trying to navigate what that looks like in her school life, and also what it looks like at home with her uncle, who is also a Black man as a cop, and how this changes the relationship with them. So that's kind of the basic premise for this story. I highly encourage you to watch the movie or read the book. They are both phenomenal pieces of literature to check out. And finally, from our last conversation, this is our last part here, is we have 3 key takeaways, or our salient points. The first one is, a lot of our conversation last time kind of talked a bit about some stereotypes, how Black men are feared or labeled as a threat in our society, while Black women are forgotten or stereotyped as aggressive. And a lot of the conversation was focusing last time around kind of how can we unpack and understand these stereotypes more to disrupt this notion of threat and aggressive, in quotation there. And then second, our actions transform how we treat people who look different than us. I know a participant last time said, wow, I'm trying to be comfortable with my discomfort, and how can we transform ourselves, which will then impact other people. And finally, the third point is that voice to power is a form of action that speaks to how we treat one another. So how can we use our voice, use our privilege, use our education to help and stand by one another? So again, these are key takeaways from that we talked about at our last event, just to kind of bring everyone back into that mindset that we had before. All right, and then again, here's some other ones here that we had from our part 3, being uncomfortable with our comfortability, taking actions. So actions, again, speak louder than words, and it starts with us, our mindset, education. This is where it starts. This is where that change starts, with each and every one of us using our voice to disrupt some of the racist behaviors and practices that we see or experience in our society. So that is a recap of our last event. And at this time, our panelists are going to kind of bring us back into the space of some thoughts and feelings around the film. And then we're going to kind of continue to explore, well, what does this film mean to us in the age of 2020 with this pandemic, with this racial epidemic that's going on? So I'm going to stop my screen share here so we can see each other. And our panelists here are going to kind of answer that question. What does this film even mean during the year of 2020? All right. So Genevieve, if you'd like, you can hit us off.
Sure. So just kind of, I'm going to try to continue the conversation from the last time. Hopefully we have some of that still fresh in our mind. But certainly for me, this film just voiced, I think, a lot of, or at least put in front of us, maybe a lot of some of the challenges that were being faced. But one of the poignant points, and I'm glad that this clip was chosen, that I had in my notes that I kind of wanted us to discuss, is this concept that I've come across many times. I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, where you might have individuals say, "I don't see color." And this is a phrase that is often utilized. And before I share my thoughts, I'm always curious what other people think about this and why we think Star had the reaction that she did to her boyfriend by saying, if you don't see color, you don't see me. So I see some people shaking their head and making some faces. So I'm hoping that maybe some of you would want to start and share a little bit on your thoughts on that particular clip in that scene.
Awesome. So if anyone has any thoughts, feel free to raise your hand and we will call right on you. You can also type in the chat as well, which is the little bubble with the V letter kind of at the bottom. You can also type there. So if anyone would like to share at this point. Oh, yep, go ahead, Leonard. Yes, go ahead.
I think we do see color, but it shouldn't affect us.
Oh, it's hard to hear you there.
We do see color, but seeing the color shouldn't affect us. Because we should see everyone's character, their personality, and disregard their color. But my question is, how does this affect people in Windsor?
Excellent. So Leonard was sharing how, with that statement, how do we see color? How does this really affect people that we see in Windsor and how we treat one another in our lives? Excellent. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. And then I see in the chat we have some friends talking here.
Mm-hmm.
So I know from Desiree, it says, I feel that when someone says, I don't see color, that they are invalidating you as a person. We are all unique. Excellent. Any other thoughts or feelings? Go ahead, John.
I think that sometimes, I know what people mean when they say that. I think what they're trying to say, I get it. But in fact, just within the last, 6 months, I had a friend of mine and I was speaking on the phone with him and he made that very remark about, I don't see color. And I said, and why don't you? And then he, of course, went in further to try to say, well, I treat everybody the same. And I said, really? I mean, I would never admit that I treat everybody the same. I mean, I treat my former wife differently than I do my children. I treat my neighbors different than I do with my professional colleagues. I mean, there's all sorts of differences that enter into how we, quote, treat each other. But as I get what he said, I don't know that I ever personally used that phrase, but it's possible I have. And over the last 8 years, I've learned a great deal. And I find that phrase somewhat offensive, but I do understand generally what people are trying to communicate.
And I think John just brought up an excellent point, which I was kind of hoping where the conversation would go when we talk about language, right? And words that we use and word choices and just everyday life, right? So I agree. I think when a lot of individuals, and I don't want to speak for everyone, use that phrase, it's more saying, I just treat everyone the same or see everyone the same, and I don't see that color, right? And separate people by that, which you can maybe see good intentions in that, but you do have to be aware and be careful with the words that you use, right? And the phrases that you choose, because not everyone is going to take it perhaps in that, like we might see it as saying, oh, well, no harm done, right? They didn't mean anything by it. So that's also something to consider when we're thinking about the movie. There were a lot of scenes where word choices, language, body language, all of that had such a great impact on, at least on me, right? And kind of realizing, okay, maybe we need to be a little bit more aware of some of those things. And
oh, you muted yourself.
I muted myself, and I thought Alex had his hand up too.
Oh, we can't hear you. Go ahead, unmute yourself, Alex.
I didn't think you had finished yet.
I did, but I muted myself when I was trying to point you out. So that's just me. So go ahead.
One of the ideas that comes to mind when talking about, if you don't see color, you don't see me. It's that like the structure of American society has put like white people at the top of a hierarchy. And if you're trying to treat everybody like you would a white person, in some cases, it's going to backfire, like not necessarily for you, but for the person that you're treating, like you don't see their color. But I think though for Star, I like, you know, who you are as a person in some ways is made up by how people treat you. And like the color of your skin changes how people treat you in the United States. And if you're not recognizing the color of a person, like you're missing a lot of their lived experience. And so so I guess that's where my thoughts have ended up so far, as far as I've interpreted it, what people have told me. So I guess what I have absorbed is like to be accurate when you want to like understand or like show understanding and empathy for someone, the color of their skin tends to matter to them because they like that it matters.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing. I see, Judge, you unmuted yourself. Do you want to add a little something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I just, from the perspective of Star and as a person of color, it always plays in my mind. And to Alex's point also, not only in the United States, but the thought processes of American, European, white people, however you want to qualify it, permeates throughout the world. It's important to recognize that as a former Marine and former Army, I've gone to Korea, Japan, and Italy, and whatever American people think, that tends to permeate throughout the rest of the world as well. It's just not the United States. So the perception of here that's given out of Black people here in the United States is also replicated over in Japan, in Korea, and other places. As a person of color, it's always in my mind thinking, you know, what is the fear? Where does the fear come from? And I wish someone would answer that question for me. Is it because I'm different in militant? Or is it the intellectual level? What is it, the economic caste? What is the fear? Is it fear of the unknown? What is, that's my question.
Absolutely.
And Cassie, I think Councilor McAuliffe was next.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Like, for me, when I hear someone say they don't see color, I just find it completely ridiculous. To Desiree's point, I mean, if you look at someone like Cassie who has, you know, curly hair, or someone else who has straight hair, you wouldn't say you don't see your hair, you don't see your how tall you are, or short you are, whatever you are. It's just a ridiculous statement. But I think what people are trying to do, with to John's, is to say that they're treating everyone equally. But it's kind of, it's an insensitive comment, and I try to tell people that that it's, I try to disarm people and not tell them that that's doesn't make sense to say that, but also that it's insensitive to say that, because even in the white culture, there's all sorts of different cultures. And to say you don't see any of those cultures is insensitive. And that's what I try to convey. And to Judge Washington's points about how Black people are viewed around the world, I was in a situation in Germany. I was visiting Germany. Not my family, but my wife's family's German relatives were very critical of not just Black people, African Americans. And they categorized them as probably even in their mind, a lower class because they're former slaves. And it was alarming to hear that in, I think it was 2008 was when I was there, from someone who was around my age too, not an old person, to categorize that person, because there are a lot of American GIs in Germany and they're African American. So to say those things, sadly to hear Germans make derogatory comments about others is not unusual, but in this day and age, it just surprised me. But thank you, Judge, for bringing that up, how the view of the rest of the world is of at least African Americans is unfortunate. But those are my comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of getting at that intent versus impact based off of perception and culture. So when I say intent versus impact, it's kind of like, oh, well, I meant to say that, you know, like you like, I might compliment something about your skin or your hair as a compliment, but then it might be offensive. Like, I'll never forget the microaggression that someone said to me saying, oh my gosh, like your hair is like Whoopi Goldberg's. You got that ethnicness to yourself. You're like a Malaysian princess. And it's kind of like, I get that they were trying to say it as a compliment, right? They had good intentions, but the way it impacted me is made me feel awkward and all sorts of stuff. And to give you another simpler metaphor, it's kind of like if, say, your friend, like say my friend Kevin's helping me move a bunch of books because I like to read, and he accidentally drops the books on my foot, and then he's gonna be like, oh, I'm so sorry, like I'm so sorry, I did not intend to drop this pile of books on your foot. But does that take the pain away? No, I'm still left with a hurt foot. I mean, it'll be sore for a little bit, and then I'll work through it and it'll be fine. But that's the same thing that we do with our words, which is really important to recognize, as Genevieve was saying, with the language, the power of our language. So I think it's really interesting to kind of unpack and understand that more kind of from a film perspective. So Camilla, if you'd like to share some of your insights on how is this relevant to 2020 here?
Sure. Thanks. And I do like how, you know, this dialogue is really getting people to share some of their thoughts and experiences. And I want to take it back to where Star is in the movie after her friend was shot. And after she goes through the pain of it all, I think she works herself to the point where something needs to be done. She needs to take action. And I think if we look where 2020 has been, post George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, a lot of people felt it's time to take action. I think that's how the protests had started. So I'm interested to see how the thoughts are from everyone here on, you know, really the commonality between this movie, again, filmed way before 2020, and here we are dealing with those same things, and you see those images, right, of someone, an African-American man or an African-American woman, or sometimes Latinos, because Latinos are, you know, our Black and brown communities are facing the same things as far as the disproportionate amount of treatment of police brutality. So when you see action as Star took, you know, she starts protesting, she starts getting involved using her voice, and then you know, bring it forward 2020, you see these young people taking action and bringing and using their voice. I'd like to know how some of the people in this group and this call feel about when is it time to use your voice and take action? And if something happened, say in the towns of Windsor, of a situation similar to this, and I don't know if something like that has in the past, but what would you do? How would you take action? What would you feel like? Would you feel motivated to do something? So I wanted to pose that to the group.
Awesome. So feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Anyone would like to share? Go ahead, Joe.
Camilla, what was the question exactly? I'm not quite clear on what your question was about. If an incident such as a police officer killing a person of color happened?
Yeah, well, similar as Star experienced, and similar as what's gone on in 2020 of all these different towns, and another name, another victim. If that happened in the towns of Windsor, would you feel that you would have to use your voice, or would you feel is there something that you would feel propelled to take some kind of action to do?
Well, I would like to think everyone here would feel to take action if something happened like that. We like to think our town is diverse, and it is, but it could happen here. So we do need to be vigilant about that. And some of the things, not to be political, but your town council is doing is we're trying to work with the police department and have community meetings, and I think there's a lot of things that could be done that seem superficial. Number one is even just changing their police uniform, changing some of the tactics they use. The police uniforms are very intimidating. The police cars, vehicles are very intimidating looking. They look like they're out of RoboCop. That's an old movie, but if you're old like me, you know what that movie was. But I think they're intentionally being intimidating with how they perception. If you look at the police officers in town on bicycles, they're dressed very differently and they're less intimidating. They're in different colors. They're more casual, and they're not all armored up. And those are the types of things I'm trying to do as a town councilor to make the police force more approachable. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I see a couple of people have hands up. We'll go to Leonard, then Judge Washington. Oh, it's hard to hear you, Leonard. You hold the mic closer to your mouth.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
No.
I'm thinking of the day-to-day racial insensitivity in Windsor, like in practice, structural racism, because we don't have low-cost housing in Windsor. They're working on that now, and Joe is probably more familiar with it. But I'm trying to bring out the practical day-to-day racism, not violence. But, I mean, we all agree that what happened in film is terrible, and we should work with our police department. But in our day-to-day living, I see racism, and maybe you do. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for those of you who couldn't hear him, he was talking about having lower costs of housing as a way to combat day-to-day racism. So he was really talking more about how can we really think about as a town to break down some of these barriers of racism with housing inequality as well. So that is a great point, because I see that a lot as well in our community. So thank you so much for sharing, Leonard. Kevin?
I just want to say, I want you all to feel free to make your comments. That's the reason for it. It's called a conversation. So don't be, bashful.
Yeah.
That's how we learn from each other. So I really want you all to be participatory. But my comment is, as I've been in Windsor for maybe 5 or 6 years, I think, in total. And I just, just because you call Windsor a racially diverse town doesn't mean that, everything is okay. That is not when I initially moved here, the perception was, oh, it's racially diverse. We get along with everybody, and yes, it's racially diverse. It may be, 70 or 80% of the students at Windsor High School are African-American or children of color. But that doesn't mean that there's not conflict, there's not racism here. Look, for example, look at our town council. We have one Black person. Okay, so if your town is so racially diverse, why aren't there more people of color on the town council? But you have a whole lot of African Americans on the school board. So why is there so much unbalance, town council versus school board? And there are three commissioners that I know of that are chair of commissions in this town, myself being one, the library advisory board, and I'm not sure the other. So why, you know, we're that diverse, why are we like that? So that's my comment.
Judge Washington.
Yes.
There's actually two African Americans on the council and one person who is a person of color, who is Councilor Dobler is half Puerto Rican.
I'm not corrected, sir.
So no, but you're still. I agree. It's not representative completely of the town where the Board of Ed, at least on the Democratic side, is. So just want to clarify.
Dig in there, Joe.
No, the Republican side of the Board of Ed is not diverse at all. Not by gender, not by anything.
Is it ever?
Very good.
Yep.
Not usually.
Yep.
I don't know how you all let me in because I don't live in or near Windsor. I'm not even sure where it is, but I do know it's in Connecticut somewhere. Well, I moved here a little over 2 years ago after living in Dallas, Texas for 20 years. And I moved to Cheshire, not because I had any particular fondness for Cheshire. It just happened to be a price range, and I really wanted to live more like in New Haven, but I couldn't find anything and whatever and so forth and so on. So at any rate, friends of mine around the country would say after I moved here, how do you like living in Cheshire? And I said, it's okay if you don't mind living with a bunch of old white people. And so, which it is, but so is mainly the whole state of Connecticut. I mean, we're one of the most racially segregated states, I think, that's going out there. But at any rate, back to, I think, the question that Genevieve, maybe you brought up, or Kamalia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but was, what do we do about it? What action would we take? And I was somewhat encouraged in June, by the outcry and the Black Lives Matter, the marches all over the country, even in little lily white Cheshire. I mean, they had a pretty big march, and they actually had to block off the main, Route 10 and so forth. And there were probably 400 to 500 people that showed up and marched, me among them. But my worry is, that was fine, and that's good, and that's some level of action. But what's going on since then? I haven't seen or heard much at all. So we get these flare-ups, and people, get out there and do things. There is a Facebook page for Cheshire, for which there is some kind of a Black Lives Matter connection. I have a Black Lives Matter sign in my condo, in the yard in front of my condo. But nobody sees it hardly because I'm at the very back of this particular complex. So, but to me, it starts with education, and how do we help from the youngest we can get them to understand and read more and more about our differences in terms of, and the history. Judge Washington, you made a question, you asked about how did it get to be that white people are fearful? Here's a book I read about a year ago by Henry Louis Gates Jr. called Stony the Road. And boy, did this give some serious history, starting with basically, the Civil War, the post-Civil War, Reconstruction, right up through probably the 1930s and 40s, and how people were indoctrinated to fear people of color. Because, well, on the one hand, we knew, this tells you, that we were given a line that black men were to be feared because all they wanted to do was rape our women. And the other side, though, they were lazy. So, it's kind of like, well, why are they so aggressive with women, but then, everything else, they're lazy. So that's where some of that came from. And it came from movies. What was that movie in 1912, 1915, the famous one? One of the first talk.
Birth of a Nation?
Yes, that one. But it also went way beyond that in comic strips, in books that were written by by presumed experts, people that would say, well, the black brain is not as large as the white brain, and all of that kind of BS. But that's all chronicled in this book. I mean, I knew a little of that. Anyway, I've said too much, but.
No, John, you haven't. And just because you live in Cheshire doesn't make you exempt from this conversation. I welcome anyone in Connecticut to be a part of this. Yep. Another movie that we're going to be discussing about a little later next year is recommended by Commissioner Jacobson, that is on this call as well, and it's called 13th. That gives a discussion of exactly what you're talking about, John. And she recommended that movie, and I think we'll be watching that as well. Thank you for your perspective, John. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So kind of just to recap before I move on to ask Maria about her perspective. So it's kind of, we're talking about a bit about what does Blackness look like in the town of Windsor, kind of our representation on our boards, how we treat one another in positions of power, and how are we reinforcing this with the literature and education and history? Like, what are we teaching our kids, and how are we disrupting this or reinforcing it within our town? So I definitely think that these are amazing points that people are bringing up. I see, Becky, you have your hand raised, and then we'll head over to Maria. Go ahead, Becky.
Hi, I just wanted to comment. I was said earlier by Mr. Washington, and I agree, diversity in the demographics of our town does not equal diversity of opinion, does not equate to anti-racism, just, you know, no matter what the town looks like. And I think we're in the unique position because we have a diverse demographic that we should be pushing more, especially because you know, our school system is 70% kids of color. We should be pushing that more in the school system. Like, I know we offer courses as electives for African American literature. I think those should be required. We require an awful lot of European history and stuff like that. And you know, if we want to send the same idea to our kids that, you know, in all things we are equal, then in history we are equal too. We should be doing this for literature. We should be doing this for history. And you know, that's one of the things I'm really trying to push towards for the school district. I think it's really important, because if we keep listing these things as electives where it's your choice, but like we de facto default to European history and stuff like that, and those are requirements, those send a universal message, and we're going to continue to perpetuate what we're already doing. If we want to change it, we've got to make the same requirements. Sorry, I'm just kind of rattling, but that's my 2 cents on it. And I've got 5 kids who I'm gonna put through the school system. Like, I want them to be on equal footing. I want them to understand. I'm homeschooling my kids this year, and because you know, and it's purely COVID related. But since I'm homeschooling the kids this year, like, my decision was that we were going to learn about the continent of Africa this year and deep dive into that, because you know, they might have, my oldest is 13 and would be in 8th grade. He might get some opportunities to learn that, but I can really, like, we can really learn about that this year. My goal is to have them know all 56 countries on the African continent, and memorize them, and, you know some of the history where, you know, we might not be pushing that as much in the public school system, but I think we should be. Anyway, sorry, that was a long diatribe that I didn't mean it to be.
No, that's all right. Thank you so much for sharing, Becky. I think that it's definitely important to integrate that into our education, because how are people going to learn without having exposure to that knowledge, or having teachers or community members here, just like us, helping to encourage them to learn about these different cultures, histories, and all sorts of language in between. So I see that a couple people have some of their hands up, so we'll go to Maria, and then we'll go to Desiree. Go ahead, Maria.
No, I think I'll give to close, to stay on the same topic. I wouldn't mind. So we keep saying Desiree, but that is Miss Pat that I'm looking at.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Miss Pat.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Miss Pat, and then oh, I lost him. Ronald, did you have something to say as well? Or were you, no? Okay. All right. So, and then I might have seen Genevieve's.
Sure,
That wanted.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So Miss Pat, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I am on Desiree's link because I couldn't figure out how to get my link up and running. So I piggybacked onto her. So my name is Pat Mack. So no, I'm not Desiree Primus. But being a teacher, a former teacher of Windsor, back in the 90s, the early 90s. So it's been a while. And being around different, I've also taught in New Britain, and I'm now currently in Bloomfield. Let me just explain to you a little thing called No Child Left Behind. Long time ago, No Child Left Behind came along real quick and said, yay, every child's going to read, and we're going to read to this particular level, and we're going to do this. And they threw everything out of the education system. We don't learn history. Heck, we don't learn math. Let's keep it real. All we are learning basically somewhat is how to read. Every time we get the formula on how to help our children become successful of passing the test, they change the test. Isn't that a miracle? Yep. The test changes. So now that the test changes, we have to go back into the drawing board. We're now to the SBAC test, which is like, 10 tests away from what we originally did. The kids could pass the old test if we had it, the original ones back in the 90s, but they darn sure can't pass the 2020 test. And it's okay because they're not supposed to, because we're raising the bar so they can go far. Let me tell you a little secret, guys. Public education is great, except for it is a system. And whenever there is a system, there will always be flaws in the system. There are major flaws in the public education system. And the major flaw is this: individuality. They want everybody to be a robot, and they want to train you to do this particular thing, this particular way. And they're okay with that because in this way, they control the thinking of the world. So think about it like this. If you think Black people are being stereotyped because of who they are and what they are, they're learning it directly, straight from the beginning. And that is called pre-kindergarten. Whenever you show a child things that they don't necessarily always know about, and you get them at their best, and you get them where they're eager to learn, and you show them what you want them to learn, not what is out there to learn. It's a little different. Now with COVID, we got some rogue situations happening. There's some teachers out there that are teaching kids different ways from the test right now because we got to worry about social emotional. We got to worry about being in school together. And we do have some people who are still following the true line because the principals are on your neck to teach to the test. But teachers are now starting to feel a little free, and they're adding a lot more genre to their work. So there is hope out here. Believe it or not, COVID looks not great, but is not as bad as we think because they really can't control everything. So that's another big fear. That's why in-person education is so important. But this is all my beliefs. Do not take this for word. These are just what I've seen over the last 28 years of education. That doesn't mean that educators are trying to do the good or the bad. It's just the nature of the system for me and my beliefs. But what I will say to you is, if we want change, we have to start at the ground up, just like they did. They didn't start in high school or adulthood to make changes to situations. They started at the beginning of the system. The beginning of the system is pre-K, kindergarten, elementary schools. You start there with your children, teaching them how to handle each other, how to be kind and loving to each other, how to be nice to each other, how to train them to breathe and handle stress and all of those things. And then guess what? We will have change in America. It's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can change. But where do we start the change? We start with the babies and work our way up. That doesn't mean we don't teach the older children. You always continue to teach because education is recyclable. You just keep going over and over and over and over again, and they'll eventually get it. So that's all I want to say on that part. If you want to see change, you got to start from the ground up. Senator McCrory and Representative Bobby Gibson came up with a bill this year, and they got it passed, which is amazing. African American and Latino history, it is not a mandate. However, it is in the school systems now. We should be proud because Connecticut is finally trying to do some stuff, but that's just the surface. We don't need to start at the high school. Remember what I said? You need to start with the babies. So the curriculum needs to start at the beginning and work its way up. And it should include not just African American, because the Native Americans have a story too. There are lots of people who have stories. She has a story too. We should be telling our stories as females. But I agree, start with the beginning and work our way up. So if we start with African American and Latinos and we bring them into the babies group and we bring them all the way up from pre-kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, you're going to see a change. We can continue to add different groups as we go along, but that's how we're going to see a difference. And I've talked way too much, and I'm sorry. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I know as a teacher right now, as a distance learning teacher, that really hits me in a different way, because as you said, COVID really brings so much to surface and so much to light. So I absolutely agree with some of your points, just kind of highlighting how we need to have teachers to have a dialogue around how are we even teaching our kids some of these constructs, whether it's in person, online, and how we need to take risks so that we can meet our students with where they're at and they can actually flourish in their learning to want to learn and invest in themselves. So 100% yes. So thank you so much for sharing. And I love all those points that you made there.
And I think Pat might have covered what Genevieve was going to say according to the chat. so she's covered. So, my perspective, one of many, right? So again, getting back to the film, 2018, right? 2018, when it was aired or shown, I think about Star's friend, her white friend, right? Where in the beginning they were great buddies and they did everything together. They visited each other's home, watched TV, with popcorn, all that stuff. And then after the event, and Star starts to take action, it was that that's where they started to bump heads a little bit, right? So that one comment where her friend, and I can't remember her name, but she's, her liner, "I'm not a racist. I've been your friend your whole time. I'm not a racist." And then by the end of the movie, their friendship just dissolved. It was no longer a friendship. So again, this was a point given in 2018, but fast forward 2020, I also mentioned the last time we met, how many of us, and for myself, in friends, peers, distance, close, very extended, even family members per se, when I would read their thoughts either on just social media or when I would come, across them, or we would have dinner, it's like, I don't even know who this person is anymore. Like I would have no idea that that's the way that they thought, because we would go back 20 years and it just never really came up. And I thought, oh my gosh, so is that really how you view me? But I'm like, but I don't understand. Why are we here? Why are we toasting? And we're like, for what reason? So, that too has disrupted many relationships today in 2020 because of that. And so that is, my experience with, someone, non-person of color. So my question to the group is, as a white individual, what has your experience been with fellow other white individuals who probably, who may have expressed different views, opposite views that you may believe or exercise. And at that moment, you know, how did you combat that? How did you deal with it? What were your narratives? Or did you try to fix the situation, or did you kind of just brush it off?
I see Becky, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Becky, then Alex.
For me personally, when I've dealt, I mean, I've tried for a long time not to make those people a part of my inner circle, but they're, you know, it's also unavoidable in everyday life. So, and I also, it's my work personally to try and change the narrative. It's not the work of people of color. Like, we perpetuated this, we're the ones who've got to fix it, and I firmly believe that. So I'm not gonna like foist it off and be like, oh, you know, next time you talk to a Black person or a person of color, you go figure that out. So I will try for a very long time. But at the same time, especially for people I've known online or who I was friends with online, I've got a lot of friends who are people of color too. And that's not something I want them continually confronted with on my Facebook page, or somebody who's going to make comments, because I also comment on a lot of politics. So if somebody's going to comment on that, I'm a firm believer in protecting my friends, and I don't want that to be something that they see constantly and it becomes a traumatic event for them. So I will try my damnedest to continue to further the narrative, to evolve somebody's way of thinking, but I'm also a firm believer in protecting my friends and loved ones, so that this isn't something that they're continually fronted with, or that they feel they've got to argue, you know, that they've got to come and defend or argue, because it's not, I'm a firm believer it's also not their problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Those are some great points as to how can we not only be better allies, but then take action, whether it's on social media or within our lives. So excellent. Thank you for sharing. Alex, I saw you had your hand up.
I did. So it's going to take me a moment to make sure that like I'm like absorbing what's been said. And I think one of the big things that I heard from you, Becky, was like making sure that the responsibility doesn't rely on people of color to explain the situation to white people. And that is also something that I have learned and heard and working on. And as in my experience was with a roommate when I lived in Windsor. I live in West Hartford now. I still work at Windsor High School, but he's he and I spoke about like the issue of racism in the United States, and he just didn't see it the way that I have like learned to, and you know, his parents are they're like they're his biological parents, but they've also like taken in foster kids, and like one of his foster siblings was a person of color, and I'm like, well, like you're trying, I guess. Like there are things that he's doing that I'm not, and like he and his family are being good citizens in ways that I'm not able to. And you know, I recognize that he and I like lived in different worlds of information, and I told him as such. You know, I told him I definitely have seen the reality of the United States as a nation like formed on racism and continuing to impose a lot of standards that disenfranchise people of color and try to like make like the white race the supreme one, which is wrong. And I'm still working on getting those lessons in my mind in a way that I can deliver, like bring them to people like him, because they are my friends. I think they want to make a positive difference in the world. And they, as far as I'm interpreting it, he's not seeing a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like education, I think would be a way, as a white people, how do you deal with other white people? Trying to educate myself so that when I see opportunities of like a friend saying like, oh, I don't see color, that I can take advantage of those teachable moments when they're receptive to something that they can change. Because it's he's at this point 27 years old, and I don't expect for one conversation to change his mind. But like continuing to have conversations where I represent a perspective of like the United States needs to change to be more racially equitable, and to know enough of the stories that I don't need to like make that point explicitly, but just like feed him that current so that the world that he lives in eventually becomes one where dealing with racial injustice is as urgent or is more urgent for him.
That makes sense. Joe, I think you had something?
Yeah, just to kind of go off what Alex said and even Pat said about just what I run into as an older white guy at this point is always running into just people just aren't educated. I mean, get the incorporating the Black American experience into the history of the country is incredibly important. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know what Black Wall Street was till about 1.5 or 2 years ago. That was a horrific event, you know, and
So can I tell you that many Black people don't know about Black Wall Street?
Maria, I've actually asked some Black people too. They're not aware of it either because of the whitewashing of American history.
Yeah.
Even the white history, like Columbus, for example, is completely wrong.
Right.
So where do you start? I mean, I think believe it or not, you know, the history of the Japanese Americans internment camps around World War II, because it wasn't that long ago, and God, can't even believe Ronald Reagan gave them reparations for the lost land they had. But it happened, so it's recognized there, that, you know, for that group. But I think to what Pat was saying, if it has to be it has to be mandatory, and it has to be, I hate to say this, not even a separate class. It's got to be the American history and part of it, not a separate class. I mean, I'm glad that it is becoming mandatory, but the U.S. history is just so messed up. Like I said, even Columbus, who's Italian and was, you know, from Spain, but that's completely inaccurate. And there's so many inaccuracies about a lot of things. I was in a conversation just yesterday, Maria, you'd appreciate this, with people who are from Puerto Rico, and I didn't know what the Jones Act was, you know, and how basically it treats Puerto Rico like a foreign country with tariffs and the trade. I mean, no one knows this stuff.
Yeah.
And you wonder why. And now once you find out this history and these, whether it's political or even goes down to the level of just economics, why we're at where we are, you'll understand that. You have a little more empathy for the situation, I think. And I think, like Pat said, you got it. It's a step in the right direction, but we're so far behind. We got to start now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think John.
Well, I just was going to say, when I go back, I look at myself, and I never thought of myself as a racist, but in more recent years, I would say I probably am or have been, unless, I don't even know if that's the best term anymore, but I look back in my early years as an adult and even late teenager years where I used to tell racist jokes, and I told them really well, and people laughed. I didn't consider myself privileged. I didn't understand the whole white privilege thing. And I could cite many, many other examples in my early years. But, as time went on and I got to experience people of color, both in employment efforts and so forth and so on, I think whatever those were views way back when, I may have changed a little bit. But I became increasingly more upset over the more recent years, the last 20 years or whatever, relative to the killing of Black men. And so in 2012, and I think that was when Trayvon Martin was shot and killed down there in Georgia or in Florida, I really finally said, enough is enough. I've got to find out. I've got to do something. I don't know what the something is, and I'm not putting myself above anybody else, because I still have many miles to go to ever get myself out of this, white privilege. But sadly, too many of my white friends and some of my more distant relatives, my kids are pretty good and so forth, they don't even realize there's anything for them to learn. And so I agree, I wish they would. But I got motivated, as I say, 8 years ago. A book I read, I don't think it was this year, but it might have been last year, but is this one. This is for white people, seriously. This is not necessary. For you people of color, I would say you don't need to read this. White Fragility. And then I'll read the finer. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And I think I really want to read it again, because my word, this woman brought up so many good examples. And I mean, I've encountered them in my life. So somebody said, what do you do how do you confront other people? I don't want to say she gives you a formula, but she does. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty powerful. And I'd sit and read that and I'd go like, oh yeah, I kind of felt that way. Yeah, I feel that way. And so, but it's education, but how do we get people to even recognize they need education? Anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely.
I'll close up my thoughts just to say, one thing we have mentioned over and over is education, right? Education is real big, and there's no age attached to it, just education. We talked about homeschool, and because of COVID, but I have to tell you, I had to, after graduating even high school, I had to homeschool myself to learn about me. Because I didn't learn about me and my culture and in America and where did I fit. So it wasn't taught to me. And as I was learning in my adult, I had to go back and homeschool myself. So a lot of us, that's what I think John was saying, like, it's not even just about a white individual not knowing what they need to learn. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I only know what I was conditioned to know, right? So that's one thing. And then last, what I'll say is also like leading by example. If it wasn't taught in the book, it's also like leading by example. And so not to get political at all, but let's just take this current presidency and the new one, how that's being shaped. So if we see a diverse group of individuals in certain roles, in certain office, titles and appointments, then the more you see that, then I think it's the more that it's more normalized, right? And then going forward, it's not weird or uncomfortable. It's just what it is, right? And that didn't take any history books to learn. Let's just start now. Let's start with that and go forward. Those are my thoughts. Thanks, Crystal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of things here that I know Joe and Alex were talking about, how we can have accessibility to information by culture. And this really ties into Pat's point before as well, where it's talking about kind of how are we communicating with one another, and as a form of education, with the books that we read, with the films, with how do we even see what's valued and important on the news. It's like, well, wait, why am I not hearing about Black Lives Matter? Because after like kind of it had a surgence and it kind of swelled with the tides, it's like, well, why am I not hearing? Well, people aren't valuing it, right? or it's not as mainstream. So there's a lot of different kind of complexities going on here. Also finding those teachable moments by meeting people with where they're at. There's nothing like trying to force a conversation on someone when they either are not ready, or they're like, I'm not quite comfortable yet, but maybe after I educate myself, after I read some more books, or after we start to bring it back together with one another. So I really appreciate all of those comments that are made. And then finally, before I see a couple people have their hands up, finally, we're starting to get into this issue, or how can we decolonize ourselves? Because even though colonialism, that happened hundreds of years ago, we are still feeling the after effects to this day with our culture, with our structure in society, with how we treat one another. So we have to try to deconstruct our minds, how we think, which will then impact how we treat one another. So just kind of highlighting, we have to decolonize that with ourselves and one another and hold each other accountable. So just a lot of great points that everyone here is talking about. And I also see friends are here communicating in the chat as well. Just you can put in some books and resources. I know a lot of you are educating yourselves, which is another step that can be taken here to continue to unpack everything with just racial identity, because this is one facet of each of ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing. I know, Carol, in the comments before, you're talking about implicit and unconscious bias. If you wanted to talk a little more about that, feel free to. If not, it's totally fine.
Partly, I'm thinking about that. And also, I read White Fragility maybe a month or two ago, and talking about the bias of white children that pick up is preschoolers. There was research that the author cited. And it's like, it permeates everything. And how to make the changes at that level, or maybe just have to start where you are. Mm-hmm. But as far as implicit bias, it's, you don't even see that people deny that they have a prejudice, because it's so much part of the way they think. It's just like that's the way the world is to them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And how do you reach them? Or maybe they're not. All you can do is be gently say that isn't how you see the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So challenging our thoughts of what is normal in the first place, and how can we unpack that with each other. So absolutely. Thank you so much, Carol. So I see we have Becky and then Pat, and then I'm going to go to our panelists for our final thoughts to conclude our event here. So Becky, then Pat.
I think when it comes to implicit bias and teaching our kids from an early stage, I think that's one of the ways in which Windsor is coming off really well. Last year, Pequannock has a new principal this year. Last year, every school my kids were in had a Black female principal. And I thought that was amazing, because that's the stuff, that's how it gets normalized. You see, when you see them in positions of power, when you have Black doctors from an early age, when you have a Black dentist and a Black lawyer and Black educators, and you normalize this. And, I hope Terrence Hill becomes our new superintendent. We, may or may not have a fight on our hands with some of the Republicans on the Board of Ed for that. But, I think those images are powerful and help normalize and give our kids an implicit sense, that yes, as Genevieve is saying, representation matters, and it starts from an early age. Like, my kids saw this last year, and that's something they'll never question. This is normal to them, which is awesome. I wouldn't be able to say that in the town we lived in. So we have a long ways to go in a lot of ways, but that's something to be noted, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for adding that, Becky. All right, Pat?
I would just like to say curriculum.
God.
Because you have to start the teaching early. In preschool, we should be looking at our books to see if they're multicultural books. Do they have representation of everyone? I worked in Bloomfield, and I still do, and I was at the preschool, and I asked the principal one day, and I said, where's the curriculum that says anything about African American children or anything like that? Oh, that's not our curriculum. We don't look at, culture in curriculum. We have a set curriculum that teaches them this. And that kind of said, we are in Bloomfield. We are 90% of people of color, and we don't teach them about who they are in preschool because the curriculum doesn't tell you to say that it's okay to look like you, but you're telling them that they have to pass a test. How are we supposed to get some kind of self-worth or any kind of anything if we don't show them who they are in a positive light? And this was in a 3 and 4-year-old program. If we don't start with curriculum showing children who they are and that they're good and they're capable of learning, then we won't get any change. Once again, it starts at the beginning and works its way up. Those are my closing remarks. And I do want to say Bloomfield has a long way to go, just like every other system has a long way to go. If we hide behind our normal story, which is, oh, it's not part of the curriculum, then let's not hide behind that. Let's introduce it to the curriculum. Curriculum is supposed to be fluid. It's supposed to change as time changes. So curriculum shouldn't be a set thing. It should be something that can, when you see something, you can add to it. Just make sure you teach it to the standards, because that's where we always go to. If it goes, and anything can be taught to the standards. The trick is whether or not you want to put it in the curriculum to show what it looks like for the children. So always remember, never forget, there's always a way to say no, but there's also a way to say yes. And curriculum is very important. It's like the foundation in a cake. If you don't have any butter and sugar, you're not going to have anything that you're going to like. No matter how many times you try to change it up, butter and sugar is butter and sugar. Ask Paula Dean. She'll tell you, can't do nothing without the butter and sugar. And if you're old fashioned, can't do nothing unless you got lard. So I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Pat. I think that that's definitely something that, again, as a teacher, like we have to really model what we want our students to see, seeing that those different parts of our identities in the ingredients, kind of trying to think of intersectionality, being like, oh, well, my race might be the sugar, my gender might be the kind of flour that I put in, my sexual orientation might be that baking soda. I might not taste it, all the different ingredients, but it is there, and it makes up each part of my beautiful self. So I definitely 100% agree how we can do that. And I'm hoping I can do research on that as a doctoral student. Just want to put that in there. So before we do our final closing thoughts, I know, Kevin, you want to hit us off before I get to each of our panelists here.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to Ms. Condon and Ms. Avant for participating on this panel. They are awesome. And to Commissioner Jacobson's point, when children see people that look like them, they respond to that. And I think the four of you ladies are fine examples of that. I know when I became a commissioner on the Human Relations Commission, and then subsequently became the chair, and I've been the chair, I think 7 or 8 years, I can't count now, I've lost track. They made this big ado about it and put it all in the Windsor Journal, and I was on the front page, and first African American judge, and the commissioner is the chair of the Human Relations Commission. I'm like, why is this just not now happening now? Has there ever been an African American chairman of this commission? And the answer to me was no. So I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't researched further. I know a lot of people had a lot of input in forming that commission, but I'm honored to be a part of it, and I'm honored to be chair, and I'm honored to have Patricia Mack as my vice chair, and Desiree Primus as the secretary. I've been the chair for 6 or 7 years, and it's like going to work. I love it. And the ladies that serve on the commission and the gentlemen are phenomenal. And I personally like to thank each and every one of my commissioners for being a part of it. And I'm honored to serve the town of Windsor. But I just want to say, I was just like enamored by the fact that, I'm the first African American chair of a commission, of the Human Relations Commission. I thought that was an automatic, but I thought wrong. So with that, Cassie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that as being the example that we wish to see here. So just to kind of close out our event, if each of our panelists would do a quick 30-second, what would you like to do to take away? Then we will be on our merry way.
I'll start. I'm going to be super quick. I just want to thank Maria for reaching out to me. This is actually one of my first events being a part of a discussion like this. And I cannot thank the group for having such dynamic discussion, us going back a second time. And I think this is really wonderful. And I hope that I get to see all your wonderful faces again at some point, and just keep doing good work, keep educating yourself. And my email is in the PowerPoint, so feel free to email me if you need anything or want to chat. I am here.
Here's our PowerPoint right there. Yep, excellent.
I'd like to echo those words. Thank you, everyone. And I want to thank everyone who's been on this panel and the panel prior for being open and putting yourself out here to have these hard conversations. And I think it was, I don't know if she's still on. She might have dropped off. But one of the previous panelists, she said, she never interacted with some person of color before, so she decided to get involved in her community and join a group. So there's little ways that you can be a disruptor, and maybe it's self-educating, maybe it's connecting with someone in a diverse group, maybe it's like John reading books, but finding different ways to kind of challenge what we're currently seeing, and challenge the norm, and challenge those images that you're being bombarded with of what is an African American or what is a person of color. So I'd like to just kind of give that to you to kind of keep doing things to kind of keep putting that narrative forward. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, we had a little bit more of an intimate group today. Our last group was maybe a little over 30, but that's good. That's okay. I think it allowed more spontaneous conversations. But together from last group and this group, I'm mostly proud and moved, I should say. I really am mostly moved that the majority of the guests were not Black folks. I'm really happy that it was a non-people of color, because this is who this is for. Usually when something like this is sponsored, it's like let's just take Black History Month, and there's a Black History Symposium. That gets interpreted as, oh, that's just for Black folks. No, it's there to educate everyone about the history of Black individuals. So I'm really proud of, specifically, this is my town, and to have the interest in having the conversations and being open and being vulnerable as well. So it really, really moves me. It warms my heart and makes me that much more prouder to be part of Windsor.
You need to unlock your device to do this.
Excellent.
I don't know what my phone is.
Okay.
My phone just wanted me to unlock something. I don't know.
Thank you so much for sharing, Maria. Kevin, would you like to close us out? Oh, you just muted yourself.
Old age. Everybody, I just want to thank you for being a part of this conversation. All of you for participating. Next, we're going to take a break now, and in January, we are going to do the youth panel. In February, we'll probably discuss Black Lives Matter and what that means and what that is all about. We will probably also have if she agrees, Maria Furlow to lead us to discussion on One Book, One Windsor's book that we selected earlier this year, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I'm sure you'll see Genevieve and Kamala again. So pay attention to your emails, because we will send out alerts because you registered to come to this conversation. So you will get alerts as to when that date is set and what that specific topic will be. Also, make sure to invite your friends and people you know that would be interested in participating, because that's how we learn from each other, by people who are participating and want to do the work. With that, I will close, and I will wish you all happy holidays. Take care of yourselves, wear your mask, and wash your hands. Have a wonderful holiday, and bye-bye.
Thank you for coming.